Hi, my name is David. Don't get scared of all these terminals behind me. I promise that I'll explain in a non-technical way why all of this is critical to saving lives. I'm working with a group of fantastic innovators on helping 211 organizations collaborate, improve, and make accessible their insanely high-quality data on the social safety net to health tech, gov tech, and ed tech innovators looking to solve the hard problems of poverty, homelessness, addiction, and deaths of despair. What you're seeing is the early stage of a distributed inference platform, which I know is technical, I'm sorry. But essentially, what that means is that not all data is numbers. And in order to get data to be AI ready, or even to begin to extract insights from data that is like anything from a doctor's note or a loose string of texts or description or comment from a field worker, in order to get any kind of meaning out of that, you have to do some math to do that, and that can get really expensive. So what I am trying to do as a result of a very deep side tangent in my work for BearHug helping the 211s is build a distributed inference platform where I can send tasks from this orchestrator to a bunch of different computers. One is sitting all the way over there, and be able to collect all of those math equations back up to help people in the real world for no cost. So I'm going to do a quick little explainer. I will put myself up here. Essentially, what is vectorization? This is the key tool. What are the calculations that I'm doing and why? So essentially, everybody's probably at this point used ChatGPT. So why does it work? How does it work? How does it know things? Essentially, how it knows things is it takes in all of the content of the internet and then essentially calculates a very complex, what's called an embedding, which essentially means that it looks at the sentence and the context of the sentence and tries to understand based on what words are close to one another, what the meaning is, and then be able to plot it on a graph like this, right? So you can see wolf, dog, and cat are all over here. Wolf is closer to dog, and they're all animals, so they're in the same region. Apple and banana are over here in the food region, so you can imagine that if somebody puts in the string, I love a good grilled cheese with tomato soup, you're probably expecting that it's going to be somewhere in this food region. So then, once that's embedded, that knowledge is embedded in this chart, somebody can come along and say, well, what goes well with tomato soup? And we would encode it using a GPU, and then we would pull on data in this area, and then basically come back and tell the user through the decoding process, well, tomato soup, right? Now that's kind of a very abstract concept, but essentially what I am trying to do is help nonprofits who come up with great solutions to help them solve deaths of despair and situations like that. But I wanted to give an example because money talks about how this could help an organization. When you're short on budget, thinking about ways to collect more money to do your job is very important. So you can see that in a more realistic example, a custom implementation might take a database of all the great things you did for humanity and all the great people who are doing those things and essentially embed those into this chart, right? So that if you had a front end then built where a donor could come along and say like, this seems interesting, but what have you guys done? It can essentially pull that data and say, we've done quite a bit of good. Here are some links in case you want to read more, and say they are somebody who's interested in running a project like that, donating to a project like that, but they want to speak to somebody, then we can also kind of pull on this data based on this loose inputted string. So it's a fabulous tool for allowing people to bring the language that they are ready to speak, whether that's Spanish or slang US American, to kind of ease the rails for whether it's a donor or one of your clients to figure out what data you have access to, what things are you doing, what things are you providing. So essentially, what's new about this distributed inference, right? I mean, what's new is the fact that it brings it into within reason for a nonprofit to be able to afford this. At least that's the goal. So essentially the traditional path, you're looking at very expensive compute. You're either going with OpenAI and Anthropic directly. This is the easiest to build. You don't need to pay for long-term support, but essentially it's very expensive, and there's going to be these highly costly recurring annual costs, and that's going to increase with your usage. So then you look at the cloud hosted path. There's plenty of great open source models. You may have heard of DeepSeek. That is just one of the amazing open source models. And there are plenty of models that are much, much cheaper and smaller to run than something big like even DeepSeek. And even if you wanted to run that on the cloud, you're still looking at these recurring annual costs that are pretty expensive. Plus, you really need experts. No matter what you're doing in AI, you do need really good expertise. And so the monitoring and the optimization is a difficult process, and it's very expensive. Then there's finally the on-premises path. Now, this is the most flexible, but also the most complicated technically. And so if you have somebody on your team or perhaps a volunteer who really can put in a lot of time to maintaining this on-premise solution, then that's great for the cheap budget that you are likely going to be able to cut out for something like this. However, what I'm proposing is essentially BearHug, which is distributed compute. We take good Samaritans who have extra GPUs, whether they be for gaming or their own AI inference, or even people for crypto. I mean, we can hopefully try to convince them to donate that compute and receive a tax write-off for that donation of time. Now, this is a complete side tangent to what I'm doing with BearHug, but I am making this as an option to help me pay my bills as I help nonprofits figure out, like 211s, figure out their AI strategy, figure out how they're going to get their data into the hands of the people that need it. And so this solution would essentially allow somebody to donate their compute, and then essentially the nonprofit could expect that their compute would be free in the long term, donated on the basis of Good Samaritans, and you could hire me as a consultant to help set it up for you. You could hire anybody as the ideal once I kind of get this running. But if you want to take advantage of this and get your AI strategy right, I'm happy to hop in and meet you where you're at. I'm designing this solution in a way that is a one-time consulting fee to bring in an expert, and then a long-term free or very, very, very affordable compute, custom designed for nonprofits who are typically funded by grants or large one-time donations. So I'm trying to meet nonprofits kind of where they're at, and this is really the first step of that, where we have embeddings for this 211 project I'm working on being calculated by essentially 2 different computers in my home right now. Lots of work to do on that. CUDA acceleration, metal acceleration, being able to optimize the speed at which all of this runs and optimize the orchestration. But essentially the solution at hand would be a custom designed, hand-tailored AI solution designed for nonprofits and socially minded ventures. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.